The radio crackled to life at 0347 hours, cutting through the pre-dawn silence of forward operating Base Reaper like a blade through flesh. Staff Sergeant Emily Johnson's eyes snapped open in her cramped quarters, her hand instinctively reaching for the M24 sniper rifle that never left her side. Even in sleep, her fingers knew its contours better than her own heartbeat. Preparing and narrating this type of story takes a lot of time and effort. If you like the story, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. If you want to watch every story of our channel, turn on the bell icon. Angel 7, this is Command. We have a situation developing 2 clicks northeast of your position. Multiple hostiles have taken the village school. Estimated 50 civilian children inside. Ages 6 to 14. Repeat, we have 50 kids trapped with an unknown number of insurgents. Emily was already moving, muscle memory taking over as she slipped into her desert camouflage uniform. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the surge of adrenaline that always preceded moments like these. In the 18 months she'd been deployed to Afghanistan's Helmand province, she'd never encountered a situation involving children. Adults, yes. Enemy combatants who'd made their choices. Yes. But never children. The voice on the radio belonged to Commander Marcus Stone Rodriguez, a 20-year SEAL veteran whose reputation preceded him into every room he entered. Rodriguez had handpicked Emily for this deployment after witnessing her performance at the sniper school in Quantico, where she'd shattered every accuracy record that had stood for over a decade. But records meant nothing when children's lives hung in the balance. "Copy that, Command," Emily responded into her headset, her voice steady despite the chaos brewing in her chest. "What's our intel on the hostiles?" "Preliminary reports suggest 8 to 12 armed insurgents. They've barricaded themselves in the main classroom building. Local Afghan forces attempted initial contact 40 minutes ago and were repelled with heavy fire. 3 wounded, none critical. The insurgents are demanding safe passage to the Pakistan border in exchange for the children." Emily shouldered her rifle and stepped into the corridor where her spotter, Corporal Jake Martinez, was already waiting. Jake, her spotter, was already waiting. His dark eyes met hers with the kind of understanding that only came from shared foxholes and split-second decisions that determined who lived and who died. "How bad is it, Emmy?" Jake asked, using the nickname only he was allowed to speak. His voice carried the weight of a man who'd aged decades in the span of months. "Children," Emily replied simply. The word hung between them like a prayer and a curse rolled into one dot as they made their way through the base's maze of concrete barriers and razor wire. The same grandfather who'd taught her to shoot tin cans off fence posts before she could properly tie her shoes. "A rifle is a tool," he'd said in his weathered voice. "But in the right hands, it can be mercy itself." Those words had carried her through sniper school, through the initial skepticism of male colleagues who questioned whether a woman belonged in their ranks, through the long nights on Overwatch when doubt crept in like fog across a valley. Now, with 50 children's lives potentially depending on her skill, those words felt like both a blessing and a burden. The Tactical Operations Center buzzed with controlled urgency when Emily and Jake arrived. Commander Rodriguez stood hunched over a map table, his silver-streaked hair catching the harsh fluorescent light. Rodriguez studied the map on the satellite imagery while intelligence officers fed him real-time updates from drone reconnaissance. "Johnson." "Martinez," Rodriguez acknowledged without looking up. "Glad you could join our morning party." Lieutenant Sarah Chun, the base's intelligence officer, looked up from her laptop screen. Chun was a brilliant analyst whose photographic memory and linguistic skills had made her invaluable in deciphering intercepted communications. Her usually pristine uniform showed signs of the hasty assembly coffee stains and wrinkled sleeves, betraying the speed with which she'd been roused. "The situation's evolving rapidly," Chun reported, her fingers dancing across the keyboard. We've identified the leader as Ahmad Kassem, a mid-level Taliban commander with a history of using human shields. Our psychological profile suggests he's desperate. This appears to be a last-ditch effort to avoid capture after his weapons cache was discovered 3 days ago. Rodriguez straightened, his steel-gray eyes finding Emily's. In that gaze, she saw not just a commanding officer, but a father who'd once tucked his own children into bed in a house thousands of miles away. "The Afghan National Army wants to storm the building," he said, his voice carrying the weight of command decisions. "I convinced them to give us 2 hours to try a surgical approach. That's where you come in." Emily nodded, her throat suddenly dry. She'd made difficult shots before enemy snipers at 800 meters, bomb makers in crowded marketplaces, insurgent leaders meeting in compound courtyards. But those targets had been clear moral choices. This situation promised to be far more complex, requiring not just marksmanship but split-second judgments about which lives to save and how to save them. "What's our approach vector?" Jake asked, already studying the topographical maps spread across the table. Rodriguez pointed to a hill overlooking the village. "There's an old shepherd's watchtower about 600 meters from the school. It offers clear sightlines to all 3 sides of the building. Local assets report the children are being held in the main classroom on the ground floor, eastern wall. The insurgents have posted sentries on the roof and are maintaining firing positions at the windows." Emily studied the satellite imagery, her trained eye automatically calculating angles, wind patterns, and potential complications. The school building was a simple rectangular structure, typical of rural Afghan construction, thick walls that would provide cover but also complicate any rescue attempt. The surrounding terrain was relatively flat, offering little concealment for approaching forces but excellent fields of fire for a well-positioned sniper. "Time of day works in our favor," she observed. "Rising sun will be behind us, putting glare in their eyes if they try to spot our position." "That's the plan," Rodriguez confirmed. "You and Martinez move out in 15 minutes. I'm sending Delta Squad to provide perimeter security and potential extraction support. Their orders are to maintain distance unless you specifically request backup." As Emily and Jake gathered their gear, Rodriguez pulled Emily aside. His hand on her shoulder felt heavy with unspoken weight. "Johnson, I need you to understand something. This isn't like our other operations. Every decision you make out there affects innocent lives. I've seen good soldiers freeze when the stakes get this high, and I've seen others make choices they can't live with afterward." Emily met his gaze steadily. "Sir, with respect, those children don't care about my comfort level. They care about going home to their families." A slight smile crossed Rodriguez's weathered face. "That's exactly what I needed to hear. But remember, heroics get people killed. We do this clean, we do this smart, and we all come home." The pre-dawn air was crisp and clean as Emily and Jake made their way to the motor pool. The desert temperature had dropped to nearly freezing during the night, a stark contrast to the blazing heat they'd endure once the sun climbed higher. Emily's breath formed small clouds as she conducted her final equipment check, each piece of gear receiving the methodical attention that had become second nature. Her rifle was a thing of beauty and precision, a M24 sniper weapon system that she'd personally modified and zeroed until it became an extension of her will. The scope, a Leupold Mark IV, had been with her through 17 confirmed kills, each one a life taken in service of preserving others. The weapon's weight in her hands was both comforting and sobering, a reminder of the responsibility that came with such power. Jake loaded their supplies into the Humvee with practiced efficiency ammunition, communication gear, water, and medical supplies. But Emily noticed he'd also packed something extra, a small stuffed elephant that had been a gift from his niece back in Texas. It was an unspoken tradition among soldiers to carry tokens that reminded them why they fought. "You ready for this, Rada?" Emily asked as they climbed into the vehicle. Jake's grin was forced but determined. "Born ready, Emmy. Besides, somebody's got to keep you from showing off too much." The drive to the observation point took 23 minutes, winding through terrain that shifted from rocky desert to scrubland, dotted with ancient olive trees. Emily used the time to center herself, employing breathing techniques she'd learned from an old Marine instructor who'd served in Vietnam. Each breath in brought focus. Each breath out released doubt and fear. The shepherd's watchtower was exactly as described, a crumbling stone structure that had probably stood for decades, weathered by wind and war but still solid enough to provide a stable shooting platform. As Jake set up their observation equipment, Emily surveyed the target area through her rifle scope. The village of Costa Ferros spread before them like something from another century. Mud brick houses clustered around a central well, their flat roofs connected by a maze of narrow alleys that had witnessed countless generations of daily life. The school building stood at the village's heart, its modern construction a stark contrast to the traditional architecture surrounding it. Through her scope, Emily could see movement in the school's windows, dark shapes that resolved into armed figures maintaining watch positions. On the roof, 2 sentries paced back and forth, their AK-47s clearly visible. But what made Emily's heart clench was the glimpse she caught of small faces pressed against a window on the ground floor. Children's faces marked by fear and confusion. "I count 9 hostiles so far," Jake reported from his spotting scope. 3 on the roof, 6 at various windows. "But there could be more inside we can't see." Emily's radio crackled. "Angel 7, this is command. Afghan negotiator is attempting communication with the hostiles. Stand by for updates." As they waited, Emily found herself studying the children's faces through her scope. She could see a little girl, maybe 8 years old, with braided hair and wide, frightened eyes. A boy, who couldn't have been more than 6, kept looking around as if searching for his mother. These weren't abstract casualties or statistics. They were individual human beings, whose lives had been interrupted by forces beyond their control. The radio erupted with urgent chatter. "Command, this is Overwatch. We have movement. The hostiles are becoming agitated. It looks like negotiations aren't going well." Emily adjusted her scope and watched as one of the insurgents gesticulated angrily from a second-floor window. Through her earpiece, she could hear fragments of shouted Arabic being translated by the intelligence team. "He's saying the government forces need to pull back another kilometer," Chun's voice reported. "He's threatening to." "Emily, he's threatening to hurt the children if his demands aren't met in the next 30 minutes. The weight of the situation settled on Emily's shoulders like a lead blanket. This wasn't going to be a patient surveillance mission or a carefully planned elimination of a high-value target. This was going to require split-second decisions and precision shooting under the worst possible circumstances. "Radar, I need you to map every hostile position you can identify," Emily said quietly. "Range to each window, wind calculations, potential bullet trajectories through the building. We may need to move fast when this goes sideways." Jake was already working, his notebook filling with precise measurements and calculations. His ability to process multiple variables simultaneously had saved their lives more times than Emily cared to count. As the sun climbed higher, painting the village in shades of gold and amber, Emily found herself thinking about choice and consequence. Every trigger pull in her career had been a choice, sometimes made in milliseconds, but always a conscious decision to end one life in service of preserving others. Today, that moral calculus was more complex than ever. A child's cry echoed across the distance, barely audible but unmistakably human. Emily's finger found the trigger guard of her rifle, not quite touching the trigger itself, but ready. Whatever happened in the next few hours would define not just her career, but the lives of 50 innocent children who had simply gone to school on what should have been an ordinary day, The radio crackled again. Angel 7. Negotiations have failed. Hostiles are demanding immediate withdrawal of all government forces, or they begin executing hostages. We are cleared to engage. Repeat, you are cleared to engage. Emily's world narrowed to the crosshairs of her scope and the impossible decisions that lay ahead. The weight of the rifle against Emily's shoulder felt heavier than usual as she settled into position behind the crumbling stone parapet of the watchtower. The morning sun cast long shadows across the village below, but in her mind, she was transported to a different place entirely, a ranch in Montana where a 12-year-old girl had first learned that precision and patience could mean the difference. Between dinner and hunger, the metal cold against her cheek as she learned to sight a target. Breathe in, breathe out, hold, he would whisper, his voice barely audible above the Montana wind. The rifle doesn't lie, Emily. It tells the truth, but only if you're honest with it first. Those lessons had shaped more than just her marksmanship. They had forged her character, teaching her that power without restraint was destruction, that skill without wisdom was mere showing off. Now, with 50 children's lives hanging in the balance, those childhood lessons felt both profoundly relevant and impossibly distant. Jake shifted beside her, making minute adjustments to his spotting scope. Through their years of partnership, they had developed an almost telepathic connection. She could sense his tension, the way his breathing had shifted to match the gravity of their situation. He was thinking about his own family, his sister, Maria, and her 3 children back in San Antonio. Emily knew this because she was thinking about families too. Talk to me, Radar, Emily said softly, needing his familiar voice to anchor her in the present moment. Winds picking up from the southwest, maybe 3 to 5 miles per hour at ground level. Jake reported, his voice steady and professional. Temperature rising, which means heat shimmer could be a factor in another hour. Range to the main building is 617 meters verified. I've got clear sight lines to 7 window positions in the roof. Emily nodded, but her mind was wandering despite her efforts to maintain focus. She thought about the conversation she'd had with her mother just 3 days ago during their weekly video call. Sarah Johnson had been tending to her garden in Billings, her hands dirty with soil that would soon nurture tomatoes and lettuce and beans. The normalcy of that image, her mother's smile, the familiar kitchen in the background, the sound of their old dog Max barking at something in the yard, felt like it belonged to a different universe. I worry about you, honey, her mother had said, the way she did every week. I know you're doing important work, but I also know my daughter. You carry too much responsibility on those shoulders. Emily had deflected, the way she always did, talking about the weather and the food and the progress they were making in the region. She never mentioned the nightmares that sometimes woke her in the middle of the night, or the way her hands would shake after particularly difficult missions. She never talked about the weight that seemed to settle deeper into her bones with each confirmed kill, each life taken in service of a greater good she hoped she understood. The truth was that Emily Johnson had always been someone who felt too much. As a child, she'd cried when her grandfather had to put down a sick calf, even though she understood it was necessary. As a teenager, she'd spent hours volunteering at the local animal shelter, drawn to creatures that needed protection. When she'd enlisted in the Army at 18, it hadn't been out of bloodlust or a desire for adventure. It had been because she believed, with the fierce certainty of youth, that she could make the world safer for people who couldn't protect themselves. That idealism had been tested repeatedly over her 6-year military career. She'd seen corruption and incompetence, witnessed good soldiers broken by impossible situations, watched as politics sometimes trumped common sense in ways that cost lives. But somehow, at her core, she'd maintained the belief that her skills could be a force for good. Every confirmed kill had been carefully cataloged in her mind, not with pride, but with the solemn recognition of a life ended so that others might continue. Movement on the roof, Jake whispered. drawing Emily back to the present. One of the sentries is repositioning. He's moving toward the eastern parapet. Emily adjusted her scope and found the target. The man was young, maybe 19 or 20, wearing a mixture of traditional Afghan clothing and military surplus gear. Through the magnification, she could see his face, clearly hollow cheeks suggesting recent hardship, eyes that darted nervously as he scanned the surrounding terrain. He carried his AK-47 with the casual familiarity of someone who'd grown up around weapons, but his body language suggested fear rather than confidence. For a moment, Emily found herself wondering about his story. Had he been born in this village? Did he have siblings among the children trapped below? What circumstances had led him to this rooftop on this morning, holding innocent lives hostage? The questions were dangerous because they humanized him, made him more than just a target to be eliminated. But Emily had learned long ago that she couldn't allow herself the luxury of seeing enemies as anything less than human. That way lay madness and moral compromise. The radio in her ear crackled. "Angel 7, this is command. We've intercepted communication suggesting the hostiles are planning to move some of the children to a secondary location. Time is becoming critical." Emily's pulse quickened. A secondary location would complicate everything, potentially dividing the hostages and making a clean rescue impossible. She needed to start identifying priority targets, mapping out a sequence that could neutralize the greatest threats while minimizing risk to the children. "I need a complete count radar," she said. "Every hostile position, every angle they can fire from. We might need to move faster than planned." As Jake began his methodical survey, Emily found herself thinking about a conversation she'd had with her first squad leader, Sergeant First Class Diana Powell. Powell had been a 15-year veteran who'd served in Iraq and Afghanistan, a woman who'd fought for respect in a male-dominated field long before Emily had arrived. During Emily's first deployment, Powell had pulled her aside after a particularly difficult mission. "You've got a gift, Johnson," Powell had said, her voice gravelly from years of shouting orders in desert winds. "But gifts come with prices. Every time you pull that trigger, you're making a choice about who lives and who dies. That's not a power you can take lightly, and it's not something you can ever fully forget." Emily had nodded at the time, thinking. She understood. But understanding and living with the reality were different things entirely. Each face she'd seen through her scope was burned into her memory with perfect clarity. She could recall the weather, the time of day, the specific reason each shot had been necessary. They weren't ghosts that haunted her. She'd never killed anyone who didn't deserve it, but they were permanent residents in her consciousness, a growing weight that she carried everywhere. 10 hostiles confirmed, Jake reported. 3 on the roof, 7 at various windows throughout the building. 2 appear to be maintaining direct overwatch of the children's room. If we're going to move, those 2 should be priority targets. Emily studied the building through her scope, her mind automatically calculating angles and sequences. The 2 men watching the children were positioned at windows on either side of the classroom. Taking them out simultaneously would require 2 precise shots fired within seconds of each other possible, but requiring perfect conditions and flawless execution. A memory surfaced unbidden, her first confirmed kill. 18 months ago in the mountains near Kabul, the target had been an insurgent sniper who'd been picking off Afghan soldiers for 3 weeks. Emily had tracked him for 2 days, learning his patterns, waiting for the perfect moment. When it came, her shot had been clean and instant. The man had died without knowing what hit him, slumping forward over his own rifle. Emily had felt no satisfaction, only a grim sense of completion. But the situation was different. These weren't enemy combatants on a battlefield making tactical decisions. These were desperate men who'd backed themselves into a corner and were now threatening children to buy their way out. The moral clarity was the same, but the emotional stakes were exponentially higher. Angel 7, this is command. We're receiving reports that one of the children may be injured. Medical evacuation will be required as soon as the area is secure. How's your status? Emily keyed her mic. In position and ready, awaiting your order to engage. But even as she said the words, doubt crept into her mind. Ready for what? Ready to take 10 lives in rapid succession while children watched? Ready to risk missing a shot and provoking the very outcome they were trying to prevent? Ready to carry the weight of whatever happened next for the rest of her life? Jake seemed to sense her internal struggle. Emmy, he said quietly, using her nickname. In violation of radio protocol, those kids are counting on us. All of them. Whatever happens out here, we're their best chance. Emily nodded, forcing herself to breathe deeply and center her thoughts. Jake was right, of course. This wasn't about her comfort level or her emotional well-being. This was about 50 children who wanted to go home to their families and 2 soldiers who had the skills to make that happen. She thought about her grandfather's words again. The rifle doesn't lie. Emily, it tells the truth, but only if you're honest with it first. The truth was that she was afraid of missing, afraid of the consequences of success, afraid of the weight she'd carry afterward. But the truth was also that those children needed her to be afraid and still act, to feel the full weight of responsibility and still pull the trigger when the time came. The sun was climbing higher now, painting the village in harsh, unforgiving light. In a few minutes, the heat would begin building toward the crushing intensity that made afternoon operations nearly impossible. If they were going to act, it would need to be soon. Emily closed her eyes for just a moment, letting herself remember why she'd chosen this path. Not for glory or recognition, but for moments like these, when her skills could mean the difference between tragedy and triumph, when years of training and sacrifice could save innocent lives. When she opened her eyes, her hands were steady, and her mind was clear. Command, this is Angel 7, she spoke into her mic. I'm ready to begin target engagement on your order. Estimated time to neutralize all threats, under 2 minutes. The radio remained silent for what felt like an eternity. Then Commander Rodriguez's voice came through, steady and certain. Angel 7, you are cleared to engage. Repeat, you are cleared to engage. Make every shot count. Emily settled her cheek against the rifle stock, her eye finding the familiar sight picture through her scope. The first target filled her crosshairs, one of the men watching the children. Through the magnification, she could see him clearly, nervous young, holding an AK-47 with hands that trembled slightly. In another life, in another circumstance, he might have been someone worth saving. But not today, and not at the cost of innocent children. Her finger found the trigger, and the world narrowed to the space between heartbeats. The first shot broke the morning, silence like thunder splitting the sky. Emily's rifle bucked against her shoulder, the .308 Winchester cartridge sending its deadly message across 617 meters of desert air in less than a second. Through her scope, she watched the first target, a young insurgent positioned at the eastern window overlooking the children's room, drop instantly, his body falling away from the window frame. Target down, Jake confirmed, his voice steady despite the chaos about to unfold. Clean hit. Acquiring second priority target, Emily was already cycling the bolt, chambering a fresh round. Her movements were fluid and automatic, the result of thousands of repetitions in training and dozens of actual combat situations. But her heart hammered against her ribs as she swung the rifle toward the second window, where another insurgent maintained overwatch of the hostages. The second target had heard the first shot and was turning, his weapon coming up as he searched for the source of the attack. Emily had perhaps 3 seconds before he could react effectively, 3 seconds before the situation escalated beyond all control. She found him in her crosshairs, an older man with graying beard and eyes wide. With sudden understanding, the second shot followed 4 seconds after the first. Another clean hit. Another insurgent eliminated before he could threaten the children or alert his comrades effectively. But now the village was awakening to violence, and Emily knew the most dangerous part was just beginning. 2 down, Jake reported, but we've got movement all over the building. They know they're under attack. Through her scope, Emily could see the chaos beginning to unfold. The remaining insurgents were scrambling to establish defensive positions, some moving deeper into the building, while others tried to identify where the shots had come from. On the roof, the 3 sentries were frantically scanning the surrounding terrain, their weapons sweeping back and forth as they searched for targets. Emily's radio crackled with urgent communications from multiple sources. Commander Rodriguez was coordinating with the Afghan forces positioned around the village perimeter. The intelligence team was intercepting frantic radio chatter from inside the building. Medical teams were standing by for civilian casualties. All of it was background noise to Emily, whose world had narrowed to the crosshairs of her scope and the deadly chess match unfolding before her. Angel 7, this is command. Rodriguez's voice cut through the chatter. Drone surveillance indicates hostiles are moving toward the children's room. You need to accelerate your timeline. Emily's blood turned to ice. If the insurgents reached the children before she could eliminate them, they might use the hostages as human shields or worse, begin executing them out of desperation. She quickly scanned the building, identifying the most immediate threats to the hostages. A movement on the roof caught her attention. One of the sentries was positioning himself behind a low wall that would give him a commanding view of the approaches to the building. From that position, he could pin down any rescue attempt while his comrades below dealt with the children. Emily adjusted her aim, calculating wind drift and the slight upward angle of the shot. The 3rd shot took the roof sentry in the center of his chest, spinning him backward and out of sight. But now the remaining insurgents knew approximately where the sniper fire was coming from, and they began returning fire toward the watchtower. Bullets cracked overhead, some striking the ancient stone walls with sharp impacts that sent fragments flying. Emily and Jake pressed themselves lower against the parapet, but they couldn't abandon their position, not with children still at risk. We've got incoming fire from multiple positions, Jake reported, his voice tight with concentration. 2 shooters on the roof, at least 3 more from windows on the western side of the building. Emily could hear the fear in the insurgents' gunfire, wild, undisciplined shooting that spoke of panic rather than tactical precision. They were spraying bullets in her general direction without taking time to aim properly. That gave her an advantage, but it also made them more dangerous in their unpredictability. She found her next target through the scope, a man firing an AK-47 from a 2nd-story window, his shots coming in long, undisciplined bursts that were eating up his ammunition quickly. Emily waited for him to pause to reload, then took her shot. The bullet caught him as he was inserting a fresh magazine, and he disappeared from the window. 4 down, Jake confirmed. But we've got a problem. Thermal imaging shows someone moving toward the children's room from inside the building. There. Almost there. Emily's heart lurched. Everything she'd trained for, all of her skills and experience, came down to this moment. She needed to neutralize the remaining threats before they could reach the hostages, but she was running out of clear shots. The insurgents were learning, taking cover, making themselves harder targets. A child's scream echoed across the distance, thin, terrified, unmistakably human. Emily felt something cold and hard settle in her chest, a determination that went beyond training or duty. These men had made their choice when they decided to threaten children. Now she would help them live with the consequences of that choice. However, briefly, the radio brought more urgent news. Angel 7, Afghan forces are reporting movement in the building. It sounds like the hostiles are threatening the children directly now. We need resolution immediately. Emily spotted movement in a ground floor window, a figure moving quickly through the interior of the building. She tracked him through her scope as he passed between windows, getting brief glimpses before he moved out of sight again. He was heading toward the eastern side of the building, toward the room where the children were being held. "I need you to talk me through this one, Radar," Emily said, her voice deadly calm. "He's moving too fast for a clean shot through the windows." Jake was already working the problem, his spotting scope tracking the target's movement. "He's moving east to west through the main corridor. Based on his speed and direction, he'll pass the third window from the north in approximately 8 seconds. Emily swung her rifle to cover the predicted window, her crosshairs steady on the opening. She controlled her breathing, slowing her heart rate despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. 7 seconds. 6. 5. The insurgent appeared in the window exactly when Jake had predicted, moving fast but not fast enough. Emily's shot took him center mass and he went down hard in the interior of the building. Through her scope, she could see his weapon skitter across the floor beyond his reach. 5 down, Jake reported. "Outstanding shot. But we still have at least 4 hostiles active, and they're getting desperate." The remaining insurgents had stopped their wild shooting and were beginning to coordinate their defense. Emily could see them moving with more purpose now, setting up overlapping fields of fire and taking proper cover. They were learning from the deaths of their comrades, adapting their tactics to deal with the sniper threat, but adaptation took time, and time was something they didn't have. Emily could hear vehicles approaching, Afghan National Army units moving in to support the operation. The insurgents would hear them too, and their desperation would only increase as their escape routes were cut off. A new voice came over the radio. "Lieutenant Chun from Intelligence. Angel 7, we're intercepting radio traffic from inside the building. The remaining hostiles are discussing." "Emily, they're talking about using the children as human shields. They're planning to move them to windows where you can't take clean shots." The words hit Emily like a physical blow. Human shields, the nightmare scenario that every precision shooter dreaded. If the insurgents positioned themselves among the children, she'd lose the ability to engage without risking innocent lives. The mission would become exponentially more complex, requiring close-quarters combat that could result in casualties among the hostages. "Time to completion?" Emily asked Jake, her mind racing through possibilities and alternatives. "At current rate, maybe 10 more minutes to clear all hostiles," Jake replied. "But if they reach the children first... He didn't need to finish the sentence. They both understood the implications. Emily needed to accelerate her pace, even if it meant taking riskier shots or exposing herself to more return fire. The children's safety had to take priority over her own. Another insurgent appeared at a rooftop position, this one more careful about exposing himself. He fired quick bursts in Emily's direction, then ducked back behind cover before she could line up a clean shot. He was learning, becoming a more dangerous opponent with each passing minute. Emily waited, her crosshairs centered on the spot where he'd appeared. Patience was often a sniper's greatest weapon, but patience had to be balanced against urgency. The man appeared again, just for a split second, but Emily was ready. Her shot caught him as he leaned out to fire, and he tumbled forward off the roof. 6 down, Jake confirmed. But the others are learning from his mistake. They're being more careful about exposure. The radio crackled with more urgent communications. "Angel 7, Afghan forces are in position for assault. Do you need backup?" Emily considered the offer. A direct assault would likely end the situation quickly, but it would also dramatically increase the risk to the children. Bullets flying through the building, explosive devices, close-quarters combat, all of it spelled potential disaster for the hostages. As long as she could maintain precision fire from distance, she had a better chance of minimizing civilian casualties. "Negative on assault," Emily radioed back. "I can still resolve this surgically." Maintain perimeter and be ready for medical evacuation. Through her scope, she caught glimpses of movement inside the building's shadowy figures moving through interior rooms, the insurgents repositioning and regrouping. She needed to draw them out, force them to expose themselves for clean shots. But how? Jake, I need options. How do we flush them out without putting the kids at risk? Jake was quiet for a moment, thinking through the tactical situation. What if we make them think they're about to be overrun? If they believe the building is about to be stormed, they might move to windows to establish defensive positions. Emily nodded. It was risky. Desperate men might do desperate things, but it might be their best chance to get clean shots at the remaining hostiles. She keyed her radio. Command, this is Angel 7. I need you to have Afghan forces make some noise. Simulate preparation for assault. Make the hostiles think they're about to be rushed. Copy that, Angel 7. Stand by. Within minutes, Emily could hear the sound of vehicles moving closer, voices shouting in Dari and Pashto, the distinctive sound of weapons being readied for action. The Afghan forces were creating a convincing impression of an imminent assault. Without actually committing to one, the deception worked. Through her scope, Emily watched as insurgents began appearing at windows again, taking positions to defend against the expected ground attack. They were making themselves targets, exactly as she'd hoped. The seventh target appeared at a second-story window on the building's south side. His AK-47 pointed toward the approaching sounds. Emily's shot was clean and final, dropping him out of sight. The eighth target tried to use a ground-floor window as a firing position and met the same fate 3 seconds later. The bias was so obvious that even some of Charlotte's initial critics began to recognize the unfairness of her treatment. Morrison approached her after a particularly successful hostage rescue exercise, where her precision shooting had saved 2 team members from simulated enemy fire. "Charlotte, I owe you an apology," Morrison said, his voice carrying genuine regret. "When you first arrived, I thought this was some kind of publicity stunt, a way for the Army to prove how progressive it was without caring about operational effectiveness. But I've watched you perform under pressure, seen how you handle stress and adversity, and you're exactly the kind of soldier I'd want covering my back in a real fight." The support from Morrison and a growing number of other candidates provided emotional sustenance during the most challenging phase of Charlotte's training. But she knew that individual acceptance was not enough. She needed to demonstrate her value to the institutional leadership that would ultimately determine whether women could serve in special forces roles. That opportunity came during a capstone exercise designed to test every skill the candidates had developed during their pre-assessment training. The scenario involved a simulated downed pilot recovery mission in hostile territory, requiring teams to infiltrate enemy-controlled areas, locate and extract the pilot, and return to friendly lines without being detected or captured. Charlotte was assigned to a team led by Sergeant Cross, the same soldier who had confronted her about the effects of her presence on unit morale. The pairing was clearly intentional, designed to test whether personal conflicts could be set aside when mission success was at stake. Cross made his feelings clear during the initial mission briefing, his tone professional but cold. "Wilson, you'll be our designated marksman, providing overwatch while the rest of us handle movement and extraction. Stay in position, follow orders, and don't do anything that jeopardizes the mission for the sake of proving a point." The mission began before dawn, with teams moving through dense North Carolina forests toward their assigned objectives. Charlotte's team advanced with practiced precision, using hand signals and tactical movement techniques that had been drilled into them through weeks of intensive training. As they approached the target area, Charlotte separated from the main group to establish an overwatch position on high ground that provided clear sight lines across multiple approach routes. For 3 hours, she maintained perfect surveillance, while Cross's team conducted their search pattern. Through her scope, She tracked the movements of opposition forces, cataloging their positions and patterns while maintaining radio silence to avoid compromising her teammates. The level of concentration required was exhausting, but Charlotte had trained for exactly this kind of sustained focus. The pilot was located in a small clearing approximately 800 meters from Charlotte's position, guarded by a two-person enemy team armed with automatic weapons. Cross's team developed a plan to neutralize the guards and extract the pilot, but the approach required crossing open ground that would leave them exposed to enemy observation posts. "Overwatch, this is team leader," Cross's voice crackled through Charlotte's earpiece. "We need those observation posts neutralized before we can move on the target. Can you provide precision fire support without compromising your position?" Charlotte studied the tactical problem through her scope, identifying 3 enemy positions that could interfere with the extraction. The shots would need to be taken in rapid succession from a single position, requiring her to remain stationary, while potentially exposing her location to return fire. It was exactly the kind of high-risk, high-reward scenario that Special Forces operators faced in real combat situations. "Team leader, I can engage all 3 targets from current position, but I'll need 60 seconds to reposition after firing. To avoid counter-battery fire, you'll have a 90-second window to complete extraction before I can resume Overwatch." Cross paused, and Charlotte could imagine him weighing the tactical risks against the mission requirements. In a real operation, the decision would mean trusting his life and the lives of his teammates to Charlotte's marksmanship skills and tactical judgment. "Overwatch, you are cleared to engage. Execute on my mark." Charlotte's breathing slowed too, a meditative rhythm as she acquired her first target, an enemy observer positioned behind a fallen log approximately 600 meters downrange. The morning mist created slight visibility challenges, but her scope cut through the haze with crystalline clarity. She made microscopic adjustments for wind and elevation, her finger applying gradual pressure to the trigger. "Execute! Execute! Execute!" The first shot echoed across the training area like thunder. The simulated enemy observer marked as eliminated by exercise controllers before he could react. Charlotte immediately shifted to her second target, a guard positioned on elevated ground who was already turning toward the sound of gunfire. Her second shot followed within 5 seconds, another perfect hit that neutralized the threat before it could respond effectively. The third target proved more challenging, as the remaining enemy fighter had gone to ground after hearing the first 2 shots. Charlotte tracked his movement through thick underbrush, waiting for the moment when he would expose himself enough for a clean shot. When he finally raised his head to scan for the source of the incoming fire, Charlotte's bullet found its mark with surgical precision. "All targets neutralized," she reported through her microphone, already beginning to disassemble her shooting. "Position. Repositioning to alternate Overwatch location." Cross's team moved with impressive speed, covering the open ground and reaching the downed pilot in less than 60 seconds. Charlotte watched through her scope as they secured the area, administered first aid to the simulated casualty, and prepared for extraction. Her new position provided excellent coverage of their withdrawal route, allowing her to track potential threats while remaining concealed from enemy counterattack. "Outstanding shooting, Overwatch," Morrison's voice came through the team radio, carrying genuine admiration. "Those were some of the cleanest shots I've ever seen under tactical conditions." But the exercise wasn't over. As Cross's team began their withdrawal with the rescued pilot, additional enemy forces appeared along their planned escape route. Charlotte counted at least 6 opposition fighters moving to intercept her teammates, armed with automatic weapons, and positioned to create a devastating crossfire that would eliminate the entire team. "Team leader, you have multiple contacts converging on your position," Charlotte reported, her voice calm despite the tactical crisis developing below her. 6 enemies moving to establish blocking positions on your primary extraction route. Recommend immediate diversion to secondary route through grid square 247. Cross's response was immediate and professional. His earlier personal conflicts with Charlotte set aside in favor of mission accomplishment. Overwatch, can you provide suppressive fire to cover our movement to alternate route? Charlotte was already repositioning her rifle, calculating angles and distances for what would be the most challenging shooting sequence of her military career. The enemy positions were scattered across difficult terrain, requiring her to engage targets at varying ranges while accounting for different environmental conditions affecting each shot. More importantly, she would need to time her fire precisely to support her teammates' movement without accidentally engaging friendly forces. Team leader, I can provide covering fire, but you need to move fast and follow my tracer rounds to avoid friendly fire. I'll engage targets from north to south, stay low, and move on my signal. What followed was 3 minutes of tactical brilliance. That impressed even the exercise controllers watching from concealed positions. Charlotte engaged enemy targets with methodical precision, her shots perfectly timed to suppress threats while allowing her teammates to advance. She communicated continuously with Cross's team, providing real-time intelligence about enemy movements and adjusting her fire to create safe corridors for friendly advancement. When the exercise concluded with successful extraction of the simulated pilot and all team members accounted for, even Captain Webb seemed momentarily at a loss for criticism. Charlotte's shooting had been flawless, her tactical communication had been professional and effective, and her ability to coordinate fire, support with ground movement demonstrated exactly the kind of advanced skills expected of Special Forces operators. Charlotte, her tactical communication had been professional, and her ability to coordinate fire exactly the kind of advanced skills expected of Special Forces operators. Charlotte, her tactical communication had been professional, and her ability to coordinate fire Target down, Jake confirmed, his voice tight with concentration. One hostile remaining, and he's moving toward the children's room. Fast. Emily swung her rifle toward the area where Jake was indicating, but the angle was wrong. From her new position, she couldn't see the final insurgents' approach to the hostages. The maintenance building had given her access to some interior spaces, while blocking others, and the most critical space was now invisible to her. I need you to talk me through his movement, Emily said, her voice steady despite the crisis developing before her eyes. Where is he going, and where can I intercept him? Jake was working frantically with his thermal imaging, trying to track the insurgents' movement through the building's interior. He's in the main corridor, moving east. Based on his speed and direction, he'll reach the children's room in approximately 30 seconds. 30 seconds. Emily scanned the visible portions of the school through her scope, looking for any window or opening that might give her a shot at the final insurgent before he reached the hostages. But the building's layout and her current angle weren't cooperating. Then, she saw at a small window on the school's eastern wall, just outside the children's classroom. If the insurgent approached the room from the corridor, he would have to pass that window for a split second. It would be the most difficult shot of her career. Moving target, partial concealment, innocent civilians just meters away from the point of impact. Jake, I need exact timing on when he passes the east window of the children's room, Emily said, settling her rifle into position and adjusting her scope for the precise distance and angle. Based on his current movement, he'll cross that window in 18 seconds, Jake replied, his own scope trained on the thermal signature moving through the building. Emily found the window in her crosshairs and steadied her breathing. This wasn't just about marksmanship anymore, it was about timing, intuition, and the kind of split-second decision-making that separated average soldiers from exceptional ones. She had one chance to save 50 children, and that chance would last for perhaps half a second. 15 seconds, Jake counted down. 14. 13. Emily's world narrowed to the crosshairs centered on the small window. Everything else the sound of distant gunfire, the helicopter approaching for medical evacuation, the radio chatter from command faded into background noise. There was only the rifle, the target window, and the steady countdown of Jake's voice. 5 seconds, 4, 3, 2. The insurgent appeared in the window exactly when Jake had predicted, moving quickly but not quickly enough to escape Emily's crosshairs. She saw him for perhaps 3/4 of a second, a bearded face, desperate eyes, and a K-47 held at the ready. In that instant, Emily made the decision that would save 50 lives or haunt her forever. The shot was perfect. The silence that followed Emily's final shot was profound and complete, as if the entire world had paused to acknowledge what had just transpired. Creating these intense military stories requires extensive research and careful attention to detail. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, please like the video and subscribe to our channel for more incredible true stories of courage and precision. Through her scope, Emily watched the small window where the last insurgent had appeared. But now there was only empty space and the gentle drift of dust motes in the morning sunlight. 10 shots fired. 10 lives ended. 50 lives saved. The mathematics of warfare reduced to its simplest equation. Jake's voice broke the silence first, his tone carrying a mixture of awe and relief. All hostiles down. Building appears secure. Emily, that was impossible shooting. But Emily barely heard him. Her hands were shaking now that the immediate crisis had passed. The adrenaline that had sustained her through the engagement, leaving her body in waves. She safed her weapon and stepped back from the window, her legs suddenly unsteady beneath her. The magnitude of what she'd just accomplished was beginning to sink in, along with the weight of what it had required. Her radio crackled to life with multiple voices speaking over each other in excitement and relief. Commander Rodriguez's voice cut through the chatter. Angel 7, outstanding work. Afghan forces are moving in to secure the building and evacuate the children. Medical teams are standing by. Through the maintenance building's window, Emily could see Afghan soldiers approaching the school cautiously, their weapons ready but their body language suggesting they believed the threat had been neutralized. In the distance, she could hear the sound of helicopter rotors growing louder as the medical evacuation aircraft approached. But it was what she couldn't see that mattered most: 50 children who would go home to their families today because of her skill and Jake's support. The thought should have filled her with satisfaction, but instead, Emily felt hollow and emotionally drained. The cost of saving those lives had been 10 others, and while she knew those deaths had been necessary and justified, they still carried. "Wait, we need to move," Jake said quietly, already packing their equipment. "Medical teams will need access to the children, and we should report back to command for debriefing." Emily nodded, shouldering her rifle and preparing to leave the maintenance building. But as they stepped outside, she was surprised to see a small crowd gathering near the school village elders, parents, and other locals who had been keeping watch from safe distances during the crisis. Their faces showed a mixture of relief, gratitude, and something else Emily couldn't quite identify. The walk back toward their extraction point took them past the school's main entrance, where Afghan soldiers were already bringing the children outside. Emily tried to avoid looking directly at the young faces, but it was impossible to ignore completely. She caught glimpses of tears and confusion, but also of children who were unharmed and would survive this day. One little girl, maybe 7 years old, with braided hair and a bright pink dress, broke away from the group, being led to safety, and ran toward Emily. Before anyone could stop her, she wrapped her small arms around Emily's leg and looked up with dark eyes that seemed far too mature for her age. The child spoke in Pashto, her voice barely audible above the noise of helicopters and military vehicles. Jake, who had picked up some local language during their deployment, translated. "She's saying thank you for keeping us safe, lady soldier." Emily knelt down to the girl's level, fighting back emotions that threatened to overwhelm her professional composure. She couldn't speak Pashto well enough to respond properly, but she managed a few basic words she'd learned. "You're safe now. Go to your family." As the little girl was gently led away by an Afghan soldier, Emily felt something shift inside her chest. The weight she'd been carrying, the responsibility, the doubt, the fear of failure seemed to lighten slightly. This was why she'd become a soldier. This moment, this child's gratitude, this successful mission that would let 50 families sleep peacefully tonight. The debriefing took place in Commander Rodriguez's office back at the forward operating base, a Spartan space decorated only with maps, photographs of fallen soldiers, and a flag that had been with Rodriguez through 3 combat deployments. Emily and Jake sat across from their commanding officer while intelligence analysts compiled their preliminary report. 10 confirmed kills, 0 civilian casualties. All 50 hostages recovered safely, Rodriguez read from the initial assessment. "Johnson, in my 20 years of military service, I've never seen precision shooting under pressure like what you demonstrated today." Lieutenant Chun looked up from her laptop, where she'd been analyzing the intercepted communications from the engagement. "The psychological impact on remaining insurgent networks in the region is going to be significant. Word travels fast in these communities, and the story of a sniper who eliminated an entire cell without harming any children will become legend." Emily felt uncomfortable with the praise and attention. "Sir, with respect, this was a team effort. Jake's spotting and calculations made every shot possible. The Afghan forces maintained perfect perimeter security. Medical teams were ready for immediate response. I just pulled the trigger." Rodriguez smiled, recognizing the humility that he'd come to expect from his best soldiers. "Johnson, accepting responsibility for failure is part of leadership. But so is accepting recognition for success. What you did today will save more lives than just those 50 children. Every insurgent group in this province now knows that taking hostages carries a death sentence." Over the following hours, as the full scope of Emily's achievement became clear, word began to spread throughout the base and beyond. The story was remarkable, not just for the technical skill it demonstrated, but for what it represented, a moment when training, courage, and moral clarity had combined to produce an outcome that seemed almost miraculous. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos, one of Emily's closest friends on the base, found her in the mess hall that evening, picking at a dinner she had no appetite for. Maria slid into the seat across from her, her expression serious but warm. "You know, the whole base is talking about what you did today, right?" Maria said. "They're calling it the most impressive display of marksmanship in the history of this deployment." Emily looked up from her untouched food. "Maria, I killed 10 people today. I know they deserved it. I know it was necessary, but that's still 10 families who won't see their sons or brothers or fathers come home tonight." Maria nodded, understanding the complex emotions that Emily was working through. "That's exactly why you're the right person for missions like this. You feel the weight of every decision, every shot, every life affected. Soldiers who don't feel that weight are dangerous." As if summoned by their conversation, Commander Rodriguez appeared at their table, followed by a man Emily didn't recognize, a tall, distinguished officer wearing the insignia of a Marine Corps colonel. Rodriguez made introductions. "Johnson, I'd like you to meet Colonel James Mitchell from Marine Special Operations Command. He's here to discuss your performance today." Colonel Mitchell took a seat at their table, his bearing suggesting the kind of officer who'd spent more time in combat zones than most soldiers spent in the military. "Sergeant Johnson, I've been reviewing the tactical reports from today's operation. What you accomplished was extraordinary, even by special operations standards. Emily felt a familiar discomfort with praise, but she maintained military courtesy. "Thank you, sir. I was just doing my job." "No," Mitchell said firmly. "You went far beyond your job description. You made tactical decisions under extreme pressure, adapted to changing circumstances, and achieved results that saved dozens of innocent lives. That's not just competence, that's exceptional leadership." Over the next few days, as the bureaucratic aftermath of the mission unfolded, Emily began to understand the broader impact of what had occurred. Intelligence reports indicated that the successful rescue had dealt a significant blow to insurgent operations in the region. Several planned attacks had been canceled, and there were indications that some insurgent groups were reconsidering their tactics in light of the demonstrated effectiveness of precision military response. But perhaps more importantly, the local population's response had been overwhelmingly positive. Village elders who had previously been reluctant to cooperate with government forces were now providing intelligence about insurgent activities. Parents who had kept their children home from school out of fear were beginning to send them back to classes. Emily received a letter from the village where the rescue had taken place, delivered through official channels but written in careful English by the local teacher, whose students had been among those rescued. The letter was simple but profound. "Dear soldier lady, the children speak of you every day. They call you the guardian angel who protected them when they were afraid. Because of your courage, our children can learn and grow and dream of better futures. We will never forget what you did for our families. With deepest gratitude, Teacher Amina Katak." Reading the letter, Emily felt something she hadn't experienced since childhood. A pure sense of purpose and accomplishment, unmarked by doubt or qualification. She had used her skills not just to eliminate enemies, but to preserve innocent lives and create hope where there had been despair. Jake found her reading the letter for the third time, sitting on her bunk in their shared quarters. "Good news from home?" he asked, though he could see from her expression that it was something more significant. "It's from the teacher at the school," Emily said, handing him the letter. "The children are calling me their guardian angel." Jake read the letter carefully, his expression growing more serious with each line. When he finished, he looked at Emily with something approaching reverence. "Emmy, do you realize what this means? Those kids are going to grow up telling stories about the day a soldier saved their lives. Their children and grandchildren will hear about the sniper who never missed when it mattered most." The weight of that legacy was both humbling and inspiring. Emily had entered the military hoping to make a difference, but she'd never imagined that her actions might become part of the stories that shaped a generation of children. The responsibility felt enormous, but so did the potential for positive impact. Commander Rodriguez called Emily to his office 3 days after the mission, and she could tell from his expression that the meeting would be significant. When she entered, she found him standing beside his desk with an official-looking document in his hands. "Johnson, I've received word from Division Headquarters about your performance during the hostage rescue operation," Rodriguez began, his tone formal but warm. "You're being recommended for the Silver Star, one of the highest decorations for valor in combat." Emily's first instinct was to protest that she'd simply been doing her job, but she could see in Rodriguez's eyes that this wasn't a discussion. It was official recognition of something extraordinary. "Sir, I'm honored, but I want to make sure Jake receives appropriate recognition for his role. None of those shots would have been possible without his spotting and calculations." "Already taken care of," Rodriguez replied. "Martinez is being awarded the Bronze Star for his support during the operation. But Emily, I want you to understand something. This isn't just about recognition. Your actions today are going to change how Special Operations approaches similar situations. The precision you demonstrated under pressure is going to become part of the training curriculum for future snipers." As Emily left Rodriguez's office, she reflected on the strange turns that life could take. 6 months ago, she'd been another soldier in another deployment, doing her duty and counting down the days until she could return home. Now she was being held up as an example of military excellence, her actions studied and analyzed by tacticians and trainers. But more importantly than any official recognition, Emily carried the knowledge that 50 children were safe because of her skills and dedication. That knowledge would sustain her through whatever challenges lay ahead, a source of purpose and meaning that no decoration or commendation could ever match. The children she'd saved would grow up, go to school, have families of their own. They would live lives that had been made possible by a single moment of perfect precision, a convergence of training, courage, and moral clarity that had transformed a potential tragedy into a story of hope. And someday, when those children were old enough to understand, they would learn the name of the soldier who had protected them. Emily Johnson, the sniper who never missed when it mattered most. 3 months after the hostage rescue, Emily stood in the same watchtower where she'd first engaged the insurgents, but everything about the landscape below had changed. The village of Costa Ferros bustled with activity as children walked safely to school, their laughter carrying across the morning air. Markets had reopened, families went about their daily routines, and there was a sense of normalcy that had been absent for years. The school building itself bore no visible scars from the firefight that had taken place within its walls. New windows had been installed, the walls had been repainted in bright colors chosen by the children themselves, and a small garden had been planted near the entrance where students could gather during breaks between classes. Emily's deployment was entering its final phase, but her role had evolved significantly since that morning when she'd saved 50 lives with 10 perfectly placed shots. She'd been reassigned to a training and advisory position, working with Afghan National Army snipers to improve their precision shooting capabilities and tactical decision-making. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was now teaching local forces to achieve the same kind of precision that had made her famous throughout the region. Every lesson she delivered carried the weight of real-world consequences, and her students understood that their skills might someday determine whether innocent lives were saved or lost. Sergeant First Class Abdullah Nazir had been her most dedicated student, a 32-year-old Afghan soldier whose motivation was intensely personal. His own daughter had been among the children rescued from the school. Nazir possessed natural shooting ability, but Emily had been working with him on the mental disciplines that separated adequate marksmen from exceptional ones. "The rifle is honest," Emily told him during their morning training session, unconsciously echoing her grandfather's words from decades earlier. "It will perform exactly as well as you deserve, based on your preparation, your focus, and your commitment to precision." Nazir nodded seriously, adjusting his position behind the sniper rifle Emily had helped him zero for optimal accuracy. "Teacher Emily, when you saved our children, how did you remain so calm?" "My hands shake when I think about my daughter in danger." Emily considered the question carefully. She'd been asked similar questions dozens of times over the past months. By students, by journalists, by fellow soldiers trying to understand how she'd maintained such perfect precision under extreme pressure. "The shaking hands are normal," she replied. "The fear for your daughter is normal. But when the moment comes to act, you have to trust your training more than your emotions. Your love for your daughter gives you motivation, but your skills and preparation give you the ability to save her." As Nazir settled into his shooting position for another practice round, Emily reflected on how much her own understanding had deepened since that crisis-filled morning. She'd learned that heroism wasn't the absence of fear, but the willingness to act decisively despite being afraid. She'd discovered that precision under pressure came not from natural talent alone, but from the intersection of rigorous training, moral clarity, and the kind of motivation that transcended personal comfort. Jake had rotated back to the United States 2 weeks earlier, his deployment complete and his service recognized with the Bronze Star he'd earned for his role in the rescue operation. Before leaving, he'd pulled Emily aside for a conversation that had stayed with her every day since. "Emmy, I want you to understand something," he'd said as they stood together watching the sunset from the base's perimeter wall. "What we did that day wasn't just about saving those specific kids. Word has spread to every village in this province. And parents are sending their children to school because they know someone like you is watching out for them. You've changed the equation here." Emily had protested, as she always did, that the success belonged to the entire team and the support structure that had made it possible. But Jake had cut her off with a gesture. "No, Emmy. Leadership means accepting responsibility for both failures and successes. You pulled those triggers with perfect accuracy under impossible pressure. You made the tactical decisions that saved 50 lives. That's leadership, and it's changed everything in this region." Now, standing in the watchtower 3 months later, Emily could see the truth of Jake's words. Intelligence reports indicated that insurgent activity in the surrounding area had dropped by nearly 70%. Several high-value targets had been captured because local villagers were providing actionable intelligence. Most significantly, school attendance throughout the region had reached levels not seen since before the Taliban's rise to power. Radio crackled with a familiar voice. "Angel 7, this is Command. Do you have time for a visitor?" Emily looked down to see Commander Rodriguez approaching the watchtower, accompanied by a small delegation that included Afghan government officials and what appeared to be a news crew. She keyed her mic. "Copy. That Command, coming down." As Emily descended the tower's stone steps, she recognized one of the men with Rodriguez, Dr. Ahmad Shah, the regional education minister whose efforts to rebuild the local school system had been hampered by insurgent threats for years. Shah had visited the base several times since the rescue operation, always asking detailed questions about Emily's tactical methods and the broader implications for regional security. "Sergeant Johnson," Dr. Shah greeted her with a warm smile and a formal handshake. "I hope you don't mind the interruption, but I wanted to show you something that I think will interest you greatly." He produced a folder containing what appeared to be official government documents, all written in Dari script that Emily couldn't read. But the photographs attached to the documents were unmistakable images of schools, children in classrooms, teachers conducting lessons. "These are enrollment reports from every school in our province," Dr. Shah explained. "Since your rescue operation 3 months ago, we have seen a 400% increase in student attendance. Parents who kept their children home for years out of fear are now sending them to school regularly." Rodriguez stepped forward, translating the broader significance. "Johnson, what Dr. Shah is telling you is that your actions that day didn't just save 50 kids. They've created conditions that are educating thousands of children who otherwise would have remained illiterate." The weight of that revelation was staggering. Emily had understood that her shooting had tactical and strategic implications, but the idea that it had fundamentally changed educational opportunity for an entire generation felt almost too large to comprehend. Dr. Shah wasn't finished. "Sergeant Johnson, our government has decided to rename the school where you conducted your rescue operation. It will now be called the Emily Johnson Academy for Peace and Learning. It will serve as a symbol of what becomes possible when courage meets precision in defense of innocent life." Emily felt her throat tighten with emotion. Having a school named after her felt surreal and overwhelming, but she also recognized the symbolic power of the gesture. For children throughout the region, the school would represent safety, opportunity, and the knowledge that someone had cared enough to protect their right to education. The news crew, which Emily now realized was from a major international network, began setting up cameras for what would apparently be an interview. Emily felt her usual discomfort with media attention, but Rodriguez caught her eye and nodded. This was part of her duty now, sharing the story so others could learn from it. The reporter, a seasoned war correspondent named Sarah Mitchell, asked, thoughtful questions about the tactical aspects of the rescue operation, but she was clearly more interested in the human elements of the story. "Sergeant Johnson, when you were looking through that scope at 10 armed insurgents threatening 50 children, what was going through your mind?" Emily considered her response carefully. "I was thinking about my grandfather, who taught me to shoot when I was young. He always said that a rifle in the right hands could be mercy itself. That morning, I had the chance to prove he was right. There are reports that you made tactical decisions during the operation that went beyond your orders, moving to a new shooting position, taking risks that could have compromised the mission. Can you explain that decision-making process?" "The children needed someone to adapt to changing circumstances," Emily replied simply. "Rules and procedures are important, but they have to serve the mission, not the other way around. My mission was to bring those kids home safely, and I was willing to do whatever that required." Mitchell's final question was the one Emily had been expecting. "What do you want people to remember about this operation?" Emily thought about the letter from teacher Amina, about Sergeant Nazir's dedication to protecting his daughter, about the laughter she could hear from the school playground even now. "I want people to remember that 50 children went home to their families that day, and that those children now have the chance to grow up and make the world better. Everything else is just details." After the interview, Emily found herself walking through the village with Dr. Shah, observing the changes that had taken place since her deployment began. The marketplace was bustling with activity. Families moved freely through the streets, and children played games in the dusty squares between buildings. They stopped at the school itself, where classes were in session, and the sound of children reciting lessons could be heard through the open windows. Dr. Shah gestured toward a new plaque beside the main entrance, written in both Dari and English, "Emily Johnson Academy for Peace and Learning, established 2024, where courage met precision in defense of innocent life. The children inside these classrooms know your story," Dr. Shah said quietly. "Their teachers tell them about the soldier who protected them when they were in danger. You have become part of their understanding of what courage and service mean." Emily nodded, feeling the weight and privilege of that responsibility. These children would grow up with a different understanding of what was possible when good people were willing to act decisively in defense of innocent life. They would carry that understanding into their own adulthood, creating ripple effects that might continue for generations. As her deployment neared its end, Emily received word that she was being reassigned to the Special Operations Sniper School at Fort Benning, where she would train the next generation of precision marksmen. The assignment was both an honor and a recognition that her skills and experience had value that extended beyond her individual service. Her final day in honor recognition that her skills and experience had value that extended beyond her individual service. Her final day in honor individual service. Afghanistan was marked by a ceremony attended by Afghan government officials, military commanders, and many of the villagers whose lives had been touched by her service. The children from the school were there, including the little girl with braided hair, who had thanked Emily in the immediate aftermath of the rescue. Commander Rodriguez spoke about the broader implications of Emily's service. "Sergeant Johnson represents the best of what military precision and moral clarity can achieve. Her actions saved lives directly, but more importantly, they changed what people in this region believe is possible." But it was teacher Amina who delivered the most moving tribute. "Our children will grow up knowing that when they were in their darkest hour, a guardian angel watched over them. They will carry that knowledge into their own adulthood, and they will pass it on to their children." Emily Johnson's courage has become part of our community story forever. As Emily prepared to leave Afghanistan, she made one final visit to the watchtower where everything had begun. The sunrise painted the landscape in familiar shades of gold and amber, and she could hear the sound of children walking to school in the village below. Jake had been right, what they'd accomplished that morning had changed everything. Not just for 50 children, but for an entire region that now understood what became possible when precision met purpose in defense of innocent life. 5 years later, the morning Georgia's sun streamed through the windows of the Special Operations Sniper School at Fort Benning, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like memories given physical form. Master Sergeant Emily Johnson stood before a class of 24 students, men and women from across the military spectrum, who had come to learn the disciplines of precision, marksmanship, and tactical decision-making under pressure. On the wall behind her hung a photograph that had become famous throughout the military community, an aerial view of a small Afghan village with a school at its center, taken the day after her legendary rescue operation. Beside it was a letter, framed in simple black wood, written in careful English by children whose lives had been saved by 10 perfect shots fired from 617 meters away. Today we're going to discuss what I call the philosophy of precision, Emily told her students, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had proven her principles under the most extreme circumstances. Precision isn't just about hitting targets. It's about understanding the weight of every decision you make when innocent lives hang in the balance. Among her students sat Lieutenant Sarah Chun, now wearing the insignia of a Special Operations officer in training to become a sniper herself. Chun had requested assignment to Emily's program specifically, wanting to learn from the soldier whose actions had redefined her understanding of what individual courage could accomplish. Also in the class was Staff Sergeant Marcus Rivera, a former Marine whose younger brother had been killed in an insurgent attack in Iraq. Rivera had heard Emily's story while recovering from his own combat injuries and had decided to retrain as a sniper, hoping to develop the skills that could prevent other families from experiencing the loss his had endured. Emily's teaching method differed significantly from traditional military instruction. While she covered all the technical aspects of marksmanship, ballistics, wind calculation, range estimation, equipment maintenance, she placed equal emphasis on the psychological and ethical dimensions of precision shooting. Every shot you fire in combat is a moral choice, she explained to her students. You're choosing to end one life in service of preserving others. That choice carries weight, and if you're not prepared to carry that weight for the rest of your life, then you need to reconsider whether this is the right profession for you. During the afternoon practical exercises, Emily worked individually with each student, observing their technique and offering corrections that went beyond mere mechanical adjustments. She watched for signs of emotional readiness, tactical thinking, and the kind of split-second decision-making that had defined her own moment of crisis in Afghanistan. Chun approached her after class, her expression serious but determined. Master Sergeant, I've been studying the tactical reports from your rescue operation. The shot sequence you used to eliminate the roof sentries while maintaining security for the interior targets. How did you calculate that in real time? Emily smiled, recognizing in Chun the same hunger for understanding that had driven her own development as a soldier. Lieutenant, the calculations were important, but they weren't the most critical factor. The most important thing was understanding the mission's true objective. I wasn't trying to eliminate insurgents, I was trying to save children. That clarity of purpose guided every tactical decision I made. After her students had been dismissed for the day, Emily made her way to the base's memorial garden, a quiet space dedicated to fallen soldiers where she often came to think and remember. Among the names carved into the granite walls was one that always drew her attention: Staff Sergeant Diana Powell, her first squad leader and mentor, who had been killed in a roadside bombing 6 months after Emily's return from Afghanistan. Powell's death had hit Emily hard, but it had also reinforced her commitment to training the next generation of soldiers. The knowledge and experience she'd gained couldn't die with her. It needed to be passed on to others who would face similar challenges and critical moments. As Emily stood before Powell's memorial, she heard footsteps approaching. Commander Rodriguez, now Colonel Rodriguez after his own promotion, joined her in the quiet space. Despite his advancement in rank, he'd specifically requested assignment to Fort Benning so he could continue working with Emily in developing advanced sniper training programs. "How are the new students progressing?" Rodriguez asked, his question carrying genuine interest rather than mere supervisory concern. "They're good," Emily replied. "Some of them have the potential to be exceptional." Chun is asking questions that suggest she understands the deeper implications of precision work. Rivera has the technical skills and the motivation that comes from personal loss. They'll both make fine snipers if they can develop the emotional discipline required. Rodriguez nodded, then gestured toward the memorial wall. "Powell would be proud of what you're building here. The training program you've developed is already showing results in combat zones. 3 of your former students have reported successful precision engagements that saved civilian lives." Emily felt a quiet satisfaction at that news. The ripple effects of her work were extending far beyond her individual service, creating a multiplier effect that amplified her impact on protecting innocent lives around the world. 10 years later, auditorium at the National Defense University was packed with military personnel, government officials, and journalists from around the world. Emily, now Lieutenant Colonel Johnson, stood at the podium preparing to deliver a lecture that had become legendary in military circles: precision, pressure, and the protection of innocent life. In the front row sat some of her former students, now seasoned combat veterans with their own stories of successful operations and lives saved. Chun had become a sniper instructor herself, carrying Emily's principles to a new generation of students. Rivera had completed 3 successful deployments and was being considered for assignment to an elite special operations unit. But what moved Emily most was the presence of several unexpected guests, young adults who had flown from Afghanistan, specifically to attend her lecture. Among them was the little girl with braided hair who had thanked Emily outside the school 10 years earlier. Now 18 and preparing to attend university in the United States, she had written to Emily requesting permission to attend the lecture. 10 years ago, Emily began her presentation. "I faced a situation that would define not just my career, but my understanding of what individual courage can accomplish when guided by proper training and moral clarity." She clicked to the first slide of her presentation, the same aerial photograph of the Afghan village that hung in her classroom at Fort Benning. 50 children were being held hostage by 10 armed insurgents. The tactical situation required precision shooting under extreme pressure, with zero margin for error and innocent lives hanging in the balance of every decision. As Emily walked through the tactical details of the rescue operation, she noticed the intense attention of her audience. Military personnel took notes on her decision-making process, her adaptation to changing circumstances, and the mental disciplines that had enabled her to maintain perfect accuracy under pressure. But the most meaningful part of her presentation came when she invited the Afghan students to join her on stage. The young woman who had once been a frightened 7-year-old spoke in fluent English about the impact the rescue had had on her life and education. "Because of Lieutenant Colonel Johnson's courage," the young woman said, her voice strong and clear, "I was able to continue my education, learn new languages, and dream of becoming a teacher myself. But more than that, I learned that there are people in the world who will risk everything to protect innocent life. That knowledge has shaped how I want to live my own life." After the lecture, Emily was approached by a documentary filmmaker who had been following her story for several years. The filmmaker, Rebecca Torres, had been working on a project about the long-term impact of individual acts of heroism in combat zones. "Colonel Johnson, I've been tracking the ripple effects of your rescue operation for 3 years now," Torres explained. "The children you saved have gone on to achieve remarkable things. 2 are studying engineering, 1 is training to become a doctor, 3 are planning to become teachers. Your actions didn't just save their lives, you preserved their potential to make the world better." Emily nodded, understanding that Torres was documenting something larger than a single military operation. The rescue had become a case study in how individual excellence could create systemic change, how one moment of perfect precision could influence the trajectory of an entire region. 15 years later, the ceremony at Arlington National Cemetery was somber and dignified, attended by hundreds of military personnel, government officials, and family members gathered to honor the career of a soldier who had redefined what precision and courage could accomplish. Emily, now Brigadier General Johnson and nearing retirement after a distinguished career, stood before the assembled crowd with mixed emotions. The occasion was the dedication of a new memorial to fallen Special Operations personnel. But Emily had been asked to speak because of what her career represented: the evolution of precision warfare and the protection of innocent life through disciplined excellence. Jake Martinez, now Colonel Martinez and commanding his own Special Operations unit, served as the master of ceremonies. The boy from San Antonio had grown into a leader whose own career had been shaped by the lessons learned during those crucial months in Afghanistan. General Johnson's rescue of 50 children from armed insurgents has become more than a military success story, Martinez told the assembled crowd. It has become a defining example of what becomes possible when training, courage, and moral clarity converge in defense of innocent life. But the most moving moment came when Emily was approached by a delegation of Afghan Americans, including several of the children she had saved 15 years earlier. They had traveled from across the United States to honor the woman whose actions had made their American educations and careers possible. The young woman with braided hair, now Dr. Amina Khattak, and following in her teacher's footsteps, presented Emily with a letter signed by all 50 of the children she had rescued. The letter, written in perfect English, expressed gratitude that had grown deeper and more sophisticated over the years. Dear General Johnson, we are no longer children, but we will never forget the day you saved our lives. Your courage gave us the chance to grow up, to learn, to contribute to the world in ways we never could have imagined. Some of us have become doctors, others teachers, engineers, and leaders in our communities. But all of us carry the lesson you taught us that day: that precision and courage can triumph over fear and violence. We have tried to live our lives in ways that honor the gift you gave us, and we hope that our achievements reflect well on your sacrifice and service. With eternal gratitude, the students of the Emily Johnson Academy. Reading the letter, Emily felt the deep satisfaction that came from understanding the full impact of her service. She had saved 50 lives in a single morning, but those 50 lives had gone on to save and improve countless others. The ripple effects of her precision shooting had continued expanding for 15 years, creating changes that would continue long after her own retirement. 20 years later, Emily's retirement cabin in Montana sat on the same land where her grandfather had first taught her to shoot, overlooking valleys that stretched toward mountains capped with snow even in summer. At 62, she moved with the deliberate pace of someone who had learned to find peace with the weight of memory and the satisfaction of duty fulfilled. The cabin's walls were decorated with photographs and letters that told the story of a career dedicated to precision in service of protecting innocent life. There were commendations and awards, but the items Emily treasured most were the personal communications from the lives she had touched: wedding invitations from former students, birth announcements from the children she had saved, graduation photos from young adults whose educations had been made possible by her courage. Jake, now retired and living in Texas with his wife and grandchildren, visited twice a year, and their conversations always returned to that morning in Afghanistan, when 10 perfect shots had changed everything. They would sit on Emily's porch, watching the sunset over the mountains, and marvel at how a few seconds of precision shooting had created changes that continued rippling outward 20 years later. On her wall hung a framed photograph from the latest graduation ceremony at the Emily Johnson Academy in Afghanistan. The school had grown into a regional center of excellence, educating over 800 students and serving as a model for educational development throughout Central Asia. Many of its graduates had gone on to universities around the world, carrying with them the story of the soldier who had protected their right to learn. Dr. Amina Khattak, the former teacher who had written Emily's first thank you letter, had become the school's principal and had developed curriculum that included lessons about courage, precision, and moral leadership. Every student learned Emily's story as part of their education, understanding it not as military history, but as an example of what became possible when skills were developed in service of protecting others. Emily's former students now led sniper programs throughout the military, teaching Emily's principles of precision under pressure to new generations of soldiers. Her tactical innovations had been incorporated into official training doctrine, and her emphasis on the moral dimensions of precision shooting had influenced how the military approached similar situations worldwide. 25 years later, the letter arrived on a quiet Tuesday morning, delivered through official military channels, but written in the careful handwriting of someone for whom English was a second language. Emily, now 77 and moving more slowly but still sharp in mind and spirit, opened it with curiosity. Dear General Johnson, my name is Ahmed Nazir, and I am the son of Sergeant Abdullah Nazir, whom you trained in Afghanistan many years ago. My father spoke of you often during my childhood, telling me about the American soldier who taught him that precision could be mercy itself. I am writing to inform you that I have recently graduated from the United States Military Academy at West Point, and I have been selected for assignment to Special Operations training. My goal is to become a sniper, following the path you pioneered and the principles you taught my father. I wanted you to know that your influence has extended across generations in ways you may never have imagined. The children you saved grew up to become leaders, teachers, doctors, and soldiers. Their children, including myself, carry the story of your courage and precision as part of our family history. When I begin my training at Fort Benning next month, I will be walking in the footsteps you created. I hope to honor your legacy by using my skills to protect innocent life, just as you did for my father's generation. With deepest respect and gratitude, Lieutenant Ahmad Nazir, U.S. Army. Emily set the letter down with hands that trembled slightly, not from age but from the profound emotion of understanding how far the ripples of her actions had traveled. A child whose father she had trained was now preparing to follow in her footsteps, carrying forward principles and techniques that had been proven in the crucible of combat. She walked to her window and looked out over the Koto, Montana landscape where everything had begun, where a young girl had first learned that precision and patience could make the difference between success and failure. The mountains remained unchanged, eternal and steadfast, but the world had been altered by what had happened in a small Afghan village 25 years earlier. 50 children had grown into adults who had changed the world in ways both large and small. They had become doctors who saved lives, teachers who educated the next generation, engineers who built infrastructure, leaders who promoted peace and prosperity. Their children were now attending universities, starting careers, and preparing to make their own contributions to human progress. Emily's phone buzzed with a text message from Jake, now approaching 80 but still maintaining their friendship. Across the decades, Emmy, did you see the news from Afghanistan? They're dedicating a new medical center named after you next week. Apparently, one of your rescued kids became a surgeon and led the fundraising effort. Emily smiled, thinking about the endless chain of cause and effect that had begun with her grandfather's patient instruction and continued through her own service to this moment when the lives she had saved were creating new opportunities for others to be saved. 30 years later, the documentary had won 3 Emmy Awards and had been viewed by millions of people around the world. The Sniper Who Never Missed, Emily Johnson's legacy, traced the impact of a single military operation across 3 decades. showing how one moment of exceptional courage and precision had created changes that continued expanding through time. Emily, now 82 and living quietly in her Montana cabin, had initially been reluctant to participate in the documentary. But when she learned that proceeds from the film would fund scholarships for students at the Emily Johnson Academy, she had agreed to extensive interviews and had provided access to personal materials that revealed the human side of her legendary service. The film's most powerful moment came when it reunited Emily with several of the children she had saved, now accomplished adults with families of their own. The scene was filmed at the school in Afghanistan, which had grown into a major educational complex, serving over 2,000 students and anchoring economic development throughout the region. Dr. Ahmad Kassem, the former student with braided hair, had become Afghanistan's Minister of Education and had used her position to expand educational opportunity throughout the country. During the documentary interview, she spoke about the profound impact Emily's actions had had on her worldview. When I was 7 years old, I learned that there are people in the world who will risk everything to protect innocent life. That knowledge shaped how I wanted to live my own life. Every policy I write, every school I help establish, every child whose education I support, all of it grows from the seed that Emily Johnson planted when she saved my life. The documentary also revealed the broader military impact of Emily's innovations. Her tactical approaches had been incorporated into special operations training programs worldwide. Her emphasis on precision under pressure had influenced how military forces approached hostage rescue situations globally. Most significantly, her example had inspired a generation of soldiers, both male and female, to pursue careers in precision shooting and special operations. Colonel Ahmad Nazir, the son of Emily's former Afghan student, had completed his own distinguished career and was now serving as an instructor at the Special Operations Sniper School that Emily had once led. During his interview for the documentary, he spoke about the continuing influence of Emily's teaching. General Johnson didn't just save 50 children that day, she created a philosophy of service that has influenced thousands of soldiers over 3 decades. Every student who passes through our program learns her story, not as military history, but as an example of what becomes possible when skills are developed in service of protecting others. 35 years later, the memorial service took place. On a spring morning in Montana, with representatives from across the military and civilian communities gathering to honor a life dedicated to precision in service of protecting innocent life. Emily had passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 87, surrounded by the mountains where she had first learned to shoot and the memories of a career that had touched countless lives. Colonel Jake Martinez, now retired but still Emily's closest friend, delivered the primary eulogy to a crowd that included former students, rescued hostages, and military leaders from around the world. His words captured the essence of what Emily had represented. Emily Johnson believed that precision was more than a technical skill, it was a moral discipline. She understood that in the right hands, weapons could be instruments of mercy, tools for protecting innocent life rather than merely ending it. Her legacy isn't measured in the enemies she eliminated, but in the lives she saved and the principles she taught. Among the mourners were dozens of people whose lives had been directly touched by Emily's service. The original 50 children she had rescued, now approaching middle age themselves, had traveled from around the world to pay their respects. Many had brought their own children, creating a visible representation of the generations whose existence had been made possible by 10 perfect shots, fired on a morning 35 years earlier. Dr. Ahmad Kassem, now a grandmother herself, spoke about the continuing impact of Emily's example. General Johnson taught us that individual courage, properly applied, can change the world. Every student who graduates from our schools, every child who grows up in safety, every family that lives without fear, all of it connects back to the moment when she chose to act with perfect precision in defense of innocent life. The memorial Service concluded with a 21-gun salute performed by current students of the Special Operations Sniper School. Each shot fired with the precision and discipline that Emily had demanded from herself and taught to others. As the sound of the volleys echoed across the Montana landscape, those gathered understood that they were witnessing not just the end of a remarkable life, but the continuation of principles and values that would outlive any individual. 40 years later, the Emily Johnson Institute for Precision and Ethics had become the premier global center for training military and law enforcement snipers, its influence extending to allied nations around the world. Located at Fort Benning but drawing students from dozens of countries, the Institute carried forward the principles that Emily had developed through her service and teaching. Commander Ahmad Nazir III, grandson of the Afghan soldier Emily had trained and great-grandson of one of the children she had saved, now served as the Institute's director. His family's multi-generational connection to Emily's legacy symbolized the enduring impact of her service on individual lives and entire communities. The Institute's curriculum had evolved to include not just technical marksmanship training, but comprehensive education in ethics, psychology, and decision-making under pressure. Students learned Emily's story as a foundational text, studying the tactical reports from her legendary rescue operation and analyzing the principles that had guided her actions. In Afghanistan, the Emily Johnson Academy had grown into the Emily Johnson University, a major educational institution that served as an anchor for regional development and stability. The university's medical school graduated doctors who served throughout Central Asia. Its engineering program produced infrastructure specialists who built roads and bridges and power systems, and its teacher training program supplied educators who carried Emily's story to children throughout the region. The original school building where the rescue had taken place was preserved as a memorial and museum, its walls displaying photographs and artifacts that told the story of 10 perfect shots that had changed the trajectory of an entire region. Visitors from around the world came to stand in the classroom where 50 children had waited in fear and to understand how individual courage had transformed potential tragedy into lasting hope. 50 years later, the centennial celebration of Emily's birth brought together representatives from military units around the world, all tracing their training and principles back to the innovations she had pioneered. The ceremony took place simultaneously in Montana, Georgia, and Afghanistan, connected by satellite technology that allowed participants to share in a global recognition of her legacy. At Fort Benning, current students of the sniper school demonstrated the techniques Emily had developed, their precision and discipline representing the culmination of 5 decades of refinement and improvement. The standards she had established remained the gold standard for precision shooting under pressure, and her emphasis on moral clarity continued to guide how soldiers approached life and death decisions. In Afghanistan, the Emily Johnson University hosted an international conference on education and regional development, bringing together scholars and practitioners from around the world to discuss how individual actions could create systemic change. The conference featured presentations from graduates of the original school Emily had saved, many of whom had become leaders in their fields and were now creating opportunities for new generations. Most remarkably, genetic descendants of the 50 children Emily had saved now numbered in the hundreds, representing a growing population whose very existence traced back to her 10 perfect shots. They lived in dozens of countries, worked in hundreds of professions, and carried with them the story of the soldier who had protected their ancestors when protection was desperately needed. Among the speakers at the centennial celebration was Dr. Sarah Johnson Martinez, Emily's grandniece, who had become a military historian specializing in the study of individual heroism in combat situations. Her research had documented the expanding influence of Emily's actions across multiple generations and geographic regions. My great-aunt Emily understood something that many soldiers never learn, Dr. Johnson Martinez told the assembled crowd. She understood that the true measure of military success isn't the enemies you defeat, but the innocent lives you preserve and the opportunities you create for others to build something better. The celebration concluded with the reading of Emily's final letter, written shortly before her death and intended to be opened on the 50th anniversary of the rescue operation. The letter was brief but profound. To the children I saved, the students I taught, and the soldiers who carry these principles forward, I want you to understand that the 10 shots I fired that day in Afghanistan were not fired by me alone. They were fired by every person who taught me, supported me, and believed in the possibility that precision could serve mercy. The children I saved went on to save others. The students I taught went on to teach others. The principles we developed together continue to protect innocent life around the world. This is how individual actions become lasting change, not through the glory of a single moment, but through the patient work of building something better that outlasts any individual life. Continue the work. Protect the innocent. Remember that, in the right hands, precision can be mercy itself. With love and respect for all who carry this mission forward, Emily Johnson. As the letter was read, those assembled understood that they were not just remembering a remarkable soldier, but celebrating the continuing impact of principles and values that had proven themselves under the most extreme circumstances and continued to guide protectors of innocent life around the world. Commander Rodriguez's final words, now spoken by his own successor at the podium, had become the unofficial motto of precision shooters worldwide. Tell them she never missed, not once, not ever, not when it mattered most. The echo of those words carried across the decades, from a desperate morning in Afghanistan to memorial services in Montana, from training facilities in Georgia to universities in Central Asia. Emily Johnson's legacy lived on in every perfectly placed shot that saved innocent life, every student who learned to balance precision with mercy, every child who grew up safe because someone had cared enough to act with perfect courage in their moment of greatest need. And in a small village in Afghanistan, children still walked safely to school each morning, their laughter carrying across the same ground where their grandparents had once waited in fear. Above the school's entrance, carved in stone, were the words that had defined a soldier's life and inspired a generation. Thank you for watching this incredible story of courage and precision. Stories like Emily's remind us of the dedication of our military heroes. Don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to Elite Military Chronicles, and ring the notification bell so you never miss our latest stories of heroism and sacrifice.